The Artist, Months of Cold, Year 2. Zhao didn't dream very often. When he did, his dreams were usually just flashes of color and sound, stuff that he forget about quickly as the sleep wore out of his eyes and the world returned to normalcy around him. But this dream was different. For one, he was in it, as was Zembi, and as was Bones. But he wasn't in control of himself, instead feeling like he was hovering over himself and his friends, his words unable to reach them, and unable to do anything but watch. Everything was embossed with a light silver, making the three look like weirdly bulky puppets, clumsy and inarticulate. They didn't speak, but walked towards a large stone altar, simply floating in the middle of this terrainless void. It wasn't decorated with anything, nor caked with any ominous substances. It just looked old. They looked up, and Zhao looked down, and he realized he was something else. Then he watched as his friends melted away, screaming soundlessly, while he somehow remained alive. He also hadn't woken up in a cold sweat for some time, mostly because it was cold enough outside that he was more likely to awake coughing and ruddy-nosed. The snow was mild so far, but that didn't change the fact that it was cold, and they hadn't finished the work on keeping the cold out and the heat in. Farther down amongst the caves, it was almost as warm as a crisp and clear day, but they were uninvestigated, and haphazardly lit. But Zembi was taking the worst of it. She was constantly sneezing, if plant people sneezed, and even more dexterously imprecise than normal, and on top of that, though she was doing her best to keep up the appearance of being fine, it was clear she was feeling pretty miserable. As for Bones, the old skeleton had taken Zhao aside some time back, and mentioned offhandedly that while he'd keep working for as long as he could, if it got much colder they'd either have to risk closing up the cavern entrances and move farther down, or his ligaments might freeze together. Then, Bones gave him the permission to either shatter the ice, and bones, so that he could rebuild, or plant him far enough in the earth that he might warm up over time. Responsibility gnawed at Zhao as he fought off the memory of the dream, and tried to take stock. Outside, their artificial lean-to, though not built to resist snow and cold, had fared pretty well, and inside they had several buildings, unfurnished but livable. The temperature, though. Zhao imagined it was just above freezing inside, but only just. The upper caverns were well ventilated but without heat besides fire, and it was getting more and more risky to look for things outside.
Morning, Zhao.
Bones, who never seemed to stop working unless he sensed something was more important, stopped working, placing an unwieldy piece of wood designed to reinforce and make the cavern walls seem more natural to the ground and walking over to where Zhao's bed was. They had finally gotten around to making good beds, at least, Zhao mused.
Hey, Bones. Still pretty chilly and pretty outside. It seems so, Herm. I had rather hoped we'd be farther along before some sort of environmental disaster headed our way.
Bones sighed, looking downcast, then realizing he wasn't helping as intended and trying to brush it off.
No worries. I'm sure this snow'll fade before the rainy season, right? The season of storms.
Zhao said hopefully, a hope that didn't survive Bones' silence.
Sorry. I don't think that's the case.
Both turned to look at Zembi, who was shivering and rolling on the floor even in sleep, even with their entire supply of erratically knit blankets. Zhao folded his arms across one another and frowned in concern, but Bones simply shook his head from side to side, apparently in thought.
How does this sound? The two of you move to the lower caves, and we build emergency housing there. I will continue work here, and one or both of you can check on me from time to time, to make sure I haven't frozen myself silly.
Bones creakily laughed, but Zhao continued to frown, trying not to look as scared or sad as he felt.
That's not. We're not doing that, at least not yet. I know we might have to, but if we can just get a few more clear days, I think we can at least get the walls covered, and maybe. I don't know.
And that was the thing, he didn't know. Zhao sunk to his feet, sighing and placing his head in his hands.
GGG. Mornin', guys.
Zembi murmured, coughing. She didn't get to her feet.
Hey, Zams. You just rest up today. We're gonna have this place heated up, no problem. Don't be dumb, I'm gonna hunt a wild animal today. Those boar things look kinda tasty. Like good eatin'.
Sniffling, Zemby managed to pry herself from the floor and yawned. Quietly, especially so for her. Falling over the two in a big ol' hug that exposed just how terrifyingly cold she was, Zemby blinked several times, shivering and wincing as she did.
Did you manage to get most of the walls done? That's nice. Hey EY. We might just make it through to something like summer again. Woohoo.
It sounded less believable when she started coughing at the end, and didn't stop.
Geez, Zemby.
Zhao began, finishing by looking for something that could be considered warm and coming up blank. Finally, he managed to convince Zemby to wear both of their old ponchos. It wasn't much, but it was still warmer than running around all gymnos-like. Bones immediately set back to work with a renewed vigor, but not for the first time Zhao realized the intensity of the task ahead of them. And they were only 3 in number. Had he spoken too soon and too confidently when he had thought about this in the first place? From where she was trying to work and mostly shuddering instead, Zemby was watching him, obviously concerned. Her lack of regard for herself was worrisome, too, and Zhao tried to remember if that was a sign of frostbite. Could plants get frostbite?
Hey, Zhao,
Zemby began, sniffling. Then, she crossed her arms and straightened up, doing her best not to look as if she was feeling as she obviously did.
If it comes to anything drastic, don't worry too much about me, alright? You guys can just go on down to the lower caves and watch after my fungi until it's warm enough for me warm up and hang with you fun guys. Why does everyone keep saying that?
Zhao asked, not meaning to say it out loud. Zemby blanched, and looked to the side.
Look, I'm just saying. Well, don't worry about me too much. I've been through way worse than a little snow, right?
Though it didn't assure him, it did raise a question that Zhao had been mulling over for some time. Furrowing his brow as he felt Zemby shakily help him lift a beam, Zhao asked.
Was the snow as weirdly soot-like in the past?
Zemby shook her head so much she lost her balance and nearly dragged herself, the beam, and Zhao to the floor. Though when Bones noticed and scrambled over, hands flailing in the air as he did, they just managed to steady themselves.
No, definitely, no way. There was some, like, snow-colored snow, and some icy blue snow, but I haven't seen snow like this before, at least not in such an island-wide scale. It's weird, is what I'm saying. I have to agree.
Bones began, as the 3 placed the beam up against the wall, where it hung, ready to break free until they could tie it up with rope and crudely made spikes of rock.
There were certainly days when snow like this fell, yes, but I cannot help but feel they were noticeable for their unusuality, not for this being a common occurrence. And on top of that, I would go so far as to say that... Wait a minute. Sorry, Bones, bro, I'm not following that non sequitur. Help me out. No, listen.
They stopped working, and listened to the howling wind outside. It had picked up just in time to match the snowfall, but there was something else to it. Something that was certainly and unmistakably someone yelling something, muffled by the snow and wind. Renewed by the call, the 3 ran outside and began to canvass the area. Branches bent back by only a few inches of snow were now held in place by a few feet, the gray-white surface crunching unnaturally under their legs. It wasn't exactly too deep for Zemby, yet, but deciding that discretion never hurt anyone, Zhao helped her onto his back. It hurt a little bit, but he refused to modify his statement. On the ground, the snow generally hadn't risen too high just yet, but there were indents in the ground where animal dens and indentations in the countryside had once been, and there the snow had settled in deep and pock-marked. Bones fell into one such mass of snow, and kept falling, shocked yelp all but obscured by the snow. It took Zhao and Zemby a few minutes to pull him free, and all 3 were shivering when they were done. And in the meantime, it was impossible to tell where, exactly, the cry they had heard earlier had come from. Zhao looked up at the sky overhead, suns hidden behind the cover of clouds, and shut his eyes. He was about to suggest returning home when they heard it again. Closer now. Very close, in fact. Help! Stumbling backwards in surprise, both Zhao and Zemby fell into the snow. Bones, undaunted by his own recent tumble, began excavating the snow beneath them, which had mostly hardened over itself, and fallen surprisingly deep, until his skeletal hands pulled away snow to reveal a tiny pocket of air and two shivering figures, one tiny and pink and the other taller and completely drenched by the fallen snow. Zhao was having trouble focusing on much else, strangely captivated by the way that her tie was physically painful to look at.
Yahoo! I can't believe it, Boleslava. We're saved.
Crawling forward from the burrow, the woman embraced Bones tightly, then went for a group hug with Bones, Zhao, and Zembi. It was a little awkward. Her pink companion, Boleslava, murmured something politely.
But, we were only trapped there for about 15 minutes, and you probably could have dug out of there on your own. Well, it's the story of the thing that counts. Thank you, brave heroes. Awahaha. Wait, so I'm not all surprised by either of you.
She gestured her head to Bones and Zembi.
But, you look like you're human as well. I guess that means you're one of the others that got sent over.
Zhao, who had been feeling a mix of slight embarrassment and pride at having, possibly, saved 2 lives, immediately felt himself on guard.
Yeah, I guess that's the case. You, don't look exactly like you're...
The stranger waved her hand in the air dismissively.
You got that right. I guess you could say that things got so shitty that unfortunately, I was the last person alive and willing to make a run towards the facility. What can you do, I suppose? Anyway. This is my dear friend and ally Boleslava.
Boleslava hopped down from the stranger's arms, seemingly inured to the cold, and did a very tiny bow.
A pleasure to make your acquaintance.
Zhao began, still feeling somewhat overwhelmed. Thankfully, Zembi stepped in to save the day.
Hey. I'm Zembi, this is Bones, and this cool guy is Zhao. Did you hear about our legendary hidden town and decide to brave the wilderness just to find us? There's a town here? I mean, it looks nice. Excuse me. But when Zembi says hidden, she means it. We built it in a cavern complex not too far from here. Perhaps it would be wiser to continue this conversation there, instead of amongst the cold.
Bones interjected, and to Zhao's relief and slight excitement, the stranger agreed. The journey back home was mostly silent. He desperately wished they had worked out some covered method of subverbal communication so that he could get the opinion of Bones and Zembi, but at the moment had to constrain himself to furtive glances. Not too far behind them, the stranger was walking behind them, seemingly unaffected by the cold and occasionally stopping to pluck something from under the snow-speckled ground around them. When they returned home, the stranger pursed her lips and whistled, and Boleslava leapt from her arms onto her shoulder, whispering something in her tiny, reed-like voice.
Impressive place. Can't say it's the first place that comes to mind when I think of building a town, but caves are mighty fine. Don't mind if I do.
When inside, Zhao was immediately reminded at how far they had yet to go. Not only was it barely any warmer than the weather outside, their settlement, all blocky houses made from hauled rock and trimmed wood, looked rudimentary and Spartan. Nevertheless, the stranger seemed fairly comfortable, flopping down onto the ground with a relaxed sigh.
Not bad at all. Much better than being buried in a snowdrift, that's for sure.
Boleslava began to wander around the floors of the caverns, tiny footsteps making a squishy sound as she peered into the building husks.
Does anyone else live here? Well,
Zhao began, but his shoulders sagged in resignation before he could think of a convincing story.
We've still got a ways to go, there. But someday, I think people'll definitely be interested in living here.
Zembi had began hauling wood for a fire, and Zhao began to look for tinder. The stranger grinned, shook her head, and pulled a lighter from the pocket of her suit jacket, and soon a pleasant fire kept the cold at bay, though Zhao was a little worried about how low their supply of fuel was getting, even if they did have sudden and unexpected company.
Kindly stranger, do you mind telling us if you know any news from the outside? This weather has made it difficult to travel, and perhaps a wanderer such as yourself might have some news to share.
Bones asked diplomatically, to the laughter of the stranger. 5 pairs of feet warmed themselves against the flames, though Boleslava wiggled back from it after a while.
You're a flatterer, skeleton guy. But do I have news for you all?
The stranger closed her eyes and reflected, expression terse.
Before all this snow started, I'm sure you guys know that stranger tower? The one that seems pretty much abandoned, now? Something went down there, though I'm not sure what. I was traveling with a friend named Paul in Boleslava, here, and we separated soon after. He's currently set up shop near a village of sentient crickets.
Zambi, who had been content to savor the fire since they had decided to build one, turned her face to the stranger, puzzled.
How do you know that something happened, then? Or I guess, do you have any more information?
Fishing a cigarette from her pocket, the stranger was about to light it and speak, but was cut off by 3 voices near simultaneously.
Oh, dear, those will ruin your teeth. Ew, lady bro, gross. That'll stank up the place for hours. Could you please do that out of our just ventilated cavern, please?
Grinning clumsily, the stranger put the cigarette back into her pocket and sniffed.
As I was saying. I don't properly know what happened, but Boleslava here does.
Boleslava looked up from the fire, which was reflected in her eyes. Though Zhao had to admit that she looked pretty adorable, he had grown accustomed to seeing the weight that lingered in the eyes of those who had had to bear a heavy task, recently. It worried him.
There were a lot of people nearby, and a lot of bad thoughts. I tried to ease up some, but people were too far away for me just to erase them. Whoa, you erased thoughts?
Zhao fell backwards, then tumbled over his pack, and then fell some more, mostly for effect. Zambi giggled and muttered something about being happy that it wasn't totally just her, now, as Boleslava chirped happily.
That's right. I don't usually do it until after I've known people though, but sometimes the world is just really sad.
Pulling himself up, Zhao nodded and rubbed his temple.
That's right, and I get where you're coming from, but some people like to try to fight through things on their own, or rely on memories that are painful as a source of pride or strength. I dunno, it just unnerves me a bit. Sorry.
Boleslava shook her head. Really, her entire body. And placed a tiny pink hand analog against Zhao's knee.
Please don't worry about it. Not only will that make you sad, it's okay. I just try to help people, and this is a thing I can do.
Nodding slowly, and admittingly find it hard to worry when Boleslava was so close by and so cute, Zhao's face split into a grin.
Yeah, you got it, little gal. Thank you. There was something else, too. Though I wasn't sure at first. I'm pretty sure that the snow was caused by something very sad waking up. Something that has only felt sadness and anger for some time. Though it probably was only awake long enough to do this to the sky.
Boleslava wiggled upwards, and everyone's face grew shadowed for a moment. Coughing, the stranger rubbed her hands together and got to her feet.
Well, hey, you all have been heroes, not just rescuing us heroes from a less than heroic fate, but listening to our ramblings. Right, Boleslava?
Boleslava chirped and moved to the stranger, who picked her up and held the small pink entity to her side.
Though I may not look it, I'm pretty much immune to the cold. Let me pay you back by getting you all some more wood, and
The stranger coughed, a little embarrassedly.
Maybe helping you reinforce this place somewhat.
Zhao and Zambi exchanged grins. Bones tried to as well, and they understood his intent even if his face couldn't quite match it.
Dude, that'd be rad. Thank you.
Zhao said earnestly, holding out a hand towards the stranger, who blushed with a mixture of nerves and pride.
My pleasure, always wanted to try my hand at architecture. Well, let me go get that wood. Wait though, first.
The stranger placed several crumpled leaves from her pocket, placing them on the ground and crushing them, then taking some of the water they had collected from rain and fallen snow, and washing them off before taking one of the hollowed-out logs left over from Bones' constant work, and placing them and some fresh water inside.
Hang this over the fire for a while. It'll take longer this way, but nettle tea. It's great stuff, trust me. And it's fine. I tried some myself, first.
Laughing as if this was especially funny, or if the strange, multi-frond leaves in the makeshift vessel looked anything like nettles, the stranger headed out. Still, the reliability of more firewood, freeing up the three to work as they liked, new conversation, and a warm fire filled the caverns with an energy they hadn't had for some time, and the brisk pace of work that had fallen to a halt as the first snows had arrived returned anew. Hours waltzed on by, and soon the upper caverns were all but lined with wood. Only the strategic slits where the blue glow of the gemstones cast a moon-like light over the cavern floor a sign that anyone present was in a cavern complex. The floor itself began to disappear under wooden planks, save for what for the ground already starting to grow ominously tall crops. Zambi had designated the area as her secret fungus plot, but it was looking increasingly like the plot wasn't going to stay secret, and they wouldn't have to worry too much about bringing down one of the boar wolves, at least not yet. Feeling confident with himself, Zhao went outside after building up an unsuspected sweat from the combination of the hard work and the fire. The cool air was refreshing rather than worrying, and watching his breath disappear on the air felt good. This felt right. They could do this. Up ahead, the stranger, who had removed her suit jacket and tied it around her waist, like it wasn't a cold evening at all, waved cheerfully, stone axe in her hands. The smile faded somewhat as Zhao approached, however, and suddenly, Zhao had the nervous feeling that he might have walked into a trap.
Zhao,
the stranger began, mumbling, then sighing, then looking away. He felt like excusing himself, but before he could think of a decent excuse, she continued.
Those scars, the ones on your hands, and palms along your wrist. Those chemical.
The saliva sank back into his throat as he nodded acquiescence.
Yeah, sort of.
As the axe sank into the snow, it made a dull clang, the stranger resting her hand on the hilt like it was an armrest. For the first time, Zhao got a good look at her eyes. They were sunken pretty badly, and looked completely at odds with the cheer she seemed to hold herself.
The company didn't. Geez, how should I say this, ahaha.
An entirely different and unpleasantly unexpected nervousness came over Zhao.
The company didn't do what?
But the stranger didn't reply, only looking fervently past him.
To answer your question, these are from the island, and they're fine. Just one hazard of living here, I guess.
She let out a big sigh and looked relieved, clapping him on the back several times. With surprising strength, no less.
Hey, good to hear it. You never do know these days. I heard there was a lot of testing going on to determine the sort of kids that'd be best suited for this project, that's all. Among other projects we had going. So, where did you pick them up?
Zhao wished that he had some kind of hat that he could pull over his ears, and wondered if Bones might be up for sewing him one.
Places? Geese. What sort of places?
Waggling her eyebrows, the stranger chortled, obviously enjoying his embarrassment.
Lady places.
Grimacing, Zhao looked to the sky, pretty sure that his blush was answer enough. To his surprise, the stranger stopped laughing, though she clearly wanted to continue, and instead sighed, lighting her long-delayed cigarette.
You know, I'm not judging you. Aren't you, though? And I mean, before I found them, Bones and Zambi.
He tried reordering their names to seem less sheepish, but the stranger just started laughing again and he quickly gave up.
They were alone, I think. Before I came around. I don't know, and she just likes to hang out like anyone would back in the yard. It doesn't mean anything, but I'm not going to let a little physical pain stop me from being a friend.
The smoke seemed almost the color of the snow around them, something not lost on either Zhao nor the stranger, who was now looking oddly sad, or at least pensive.
That's good. I'm not worried about you, or her. Not really. I just get a bit melancholy that things can't ever be as easy as all that, but that's because of this one detective I used to read pretty religiously about. Guy was a matchmaker, pretty serious about it, too. Where are you going with this?
Zhao began, but it didn't come out like a question, and she didn't respond with an answer, simply coughing smoke, smirking, and ruffling his hair.
Nowhere but home. Will this hold you all for a while?
Looking at the way the stranger had set out deforesting the area, Zhao wasn't sure whether to thank her or wince. Still, he couldn't grinning. Still.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see if we can get it back in only 5 runs.
The dying fear greeted their return on the last one, the 6th. As Bones relaxed by the fire, for once not working at all hours on tasks he wasn't necessarily built for. Just seeing the old man able to enjoy himself made Zhao happy, though perhaps not as happy as Zambi waving energetically from behind a wooden mug.
Zhao. Bro, come try some of this. It's amazing.
Zhao was going to reply, but the stranger dropped the mixture of wooden logs and kindling she was carrying and beamed.
I know, right. For whatever reason though I keep on telling people about nettle tea and they seem to think I've lost it, or maybe something about my personality screams untrustworthy, or... wait a sec.
The 5 shared the last of the fire, and the admittedly warming nettle tea, until the night fell, and only the stranger, Bones, and Boleslava were awake.
Snow's stopped.
The stranger opined, and Bones watched her out of the corner of one socket.
That it has. Are you leaving already? Ha. There's a part of me that'd want to just stay right here forever if I didn't, and I can't do that until we find Binky. Our own friend.
The stranger closed her eyes.
Of course, that doesn't necessarily go for both of us.
Kneeling to the floor, she gave Boleslava a little smile.
Do you feel like staying here while I keep up the search? These people seem pretty cool, I think. And it is nice and warm here, when the fire's going.
Boleslava shook herself in such a flurry of response she threatened to take off into the air, and the stranger laughed.
Guess that answers that, then. Though, yeah, I think when we find Binky, I wouldn't mind returning here, if you all will have us.
The old skeleton laughed with his creaky gait, and placed a skeletal hand on her shoulder.
The whole idea of us building this place was to make new friends. I don't suppose you saw the mural outside, but any are welcome. I cannot imagine either of the young wardens here would be too interested people choosing snowdrifts over the houses we've built here. Thank you. Pass on my best to those two, would you?
Boleslava whispered something into the stranger's ear, and the two laughed.
And hers, too. I hope things turn out well, for them, and all of you. Isn't that all we can hope? Well, then. Farewell.
Bones watched the two leave, the stranger humming a song he was unfamiliar with as she walked away with Boleslava on her shoulder, then sighed as he stirred the embers of the fire with one arm, the heat of the fire pit now permeating the air of their cavernous city. Nearby, Zambi's loud snores and Zhao's constant shivering as he slept did little to hide the fact of how close the two were, or Bones' many worries. Turning to watch the sky outside, Bones tried to remember what he would have done when he were younger, and the soot, like the many memories he had lost, continued to fall from the clouded skies. Chapter end.